Good morning, everybody. It's good to be back with you this morning. It is, 25 degrees, not -7? What's wrong with you guys? -7, a little too cold for you last week? I was here, okay? It's good to be with you this morning. We are continuing a 5-week series. We're in week 3, so this is our halfway point, where we've been talking about this invitation to live on purpose, that each of us was created on purpose to live with purpose in every arena of life. In week 1, we talked about identity. In week 2, we talked about our story. And this week, in week 3, I want to talk about buried treasure. That God has invested something within each of us that is to multiply and to return to Him. So in week 1, we were guided by the question, who am I? In week 2, we were guided by the question, where are you from? And this week, we're guided by this question, what have you buried? Our text for today is found in Matthew 25. If you have your Bibles, open those up. In Matthew 25, verses 14 onwards, it's the parable of the talents. I've referenced it in the last couple of weeks, but today I want to dive deep into it together. Matthew 25, reading from verse 14, this is Jesus speaking, and he says this, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also who had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew what I reap, where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed, so you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents, for to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away, and cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." We step into this parable, and the context for this parable is that the people have come to Jesus and said, tell us about the kingdom of heaven. Now, we could predict that if we went to Jesus and said, tell us about the kingdom of heaven, we might have had this excitement within us about the kinds of things he's going to tell us. He's going to tell us about the kingdom of heaven. Surely he's going to tell us, in the kingdom of heaven, the Romans are all gone, they're dead, you guys are in charge. In the kingdom of heaven, it's going to be milk and honey. In the kingdom of heaven, it's going to be amazing. It's like the manna in heaven that I gave the Israelites. It came 6 days a week, not on the 7th day. It's going to be like that, but even better. Like Chick-fil-A, right? 6 days a week, closed on Sundays, right? Gather up twice as much on day 6. Just like he told them. That's why if you go into Chick-fil-A on Saturdays, you'll see people grabbing so much. It's a principle from the scriptures. Not really, all right? Don't quote that. If this is your first time in church, that was an error of teaching. But the context for this parable is this. He's responding to the question, and he takes them in a very different direction than we might assume. Right before the parable of the talents, he teaches them this parable about brides and bridegrooms and where the brides have to keep their lamps burning with oil. They have to manage that resource and keep the lamps burning so that when the bridegroom returns, they're ready. Pastor Travis taught us about this just a few weeks back. The parable right after the parable of the talents is a parable where he's talking about the judgment seat, and he talks about how the judge divides the people into two. One group is those who have used their resources, used their money to care for the needy, to provide food for the hungry, to provide clothing for those without clothing. And the other group is those who have used their resources for selfish gain. And so the context of this parable fits within this. And if we look at the trend line through all of the three parables, we see this is an invitation to answer the question, how will you manage and steward what he has placed within your hands? This is a parable that is inviting us to consider what he has put into our hands, the time he's given us, the treasure he's given us, the talents he's given us, and answer the question, how will you manage and steward that? Will you manage it and steward it for your own gain, or will you manage and steward it for the gain of his kingdom, for the gain of others? And so as we dive deeper into this parable, we learn something about God's kingdom and God's economy. I would suggest there are a few things, 4 things that we can learn from this morning. The first thing we learn is this: the investor has an expectation of a return on his investment. He is not blasé about his investment. He is not saying, well, you only had 1, so I don't really care. Or you had 2, so I don't care. He's saying it really matters. And when he invests something, he is expecting a return, because that is how it is designed. The seed is designed to multiply. And so the investor has an expectation of a return on his investment. The second thing is this: all resources belong to him and will return to him. We are not owners, church, we are stewards. Your time does not belong to you. Your treasure does not belong to you. Your house might have your name on the title. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to him. And the call is to be a manager and a steward, not to think that you own it and can do whatever you choose with it. It belongs to him. The third point is this: the economy of his kingdom is distinct from the economy of this world. 5 is intended to become 10, to become an abundance more. 2 is designed to become 4, to become an abundance more. There is a multiplicative effect in his kingdom. Whatever is in your hands is intended to multiply. That is how his economy works. And lastly, this is intended to be an opportunity and not an obligation. That you and I are actually invited to participate in a kingdom that multiplies. We're invited to participate in an economy that he provides all of the resources. And our job is to manage and steward them so it multiplies. So there are lessons within this parable of the talents that we can grab onto today, but I would suggest also there's a couple of warnings for us in this parable. The first warning is less about what he says and more about what we hear. See, if you're anything like me, you're reading this parable and he's talking and he comes and he says, one of them got 5, one of them got 2, one of them got 1, and we say, time out. Help me understand, why did 1 get 5, why did 2? Help me understand that. Shouldn't we all get 5? Shouldn't we all get 2? Anyone else hear that? And the warning is this: we can get so obsessed with what someone else has been called to manage that we miss what is ours to manage. Who cares that this person has 2? You have 1 that can become 2, that can become 4, that can become 8, that can become 16, 32. My math runs out after that, right? You get it. The multiplicative effect, you get so obsessed that you only have 1, you miss the fact that in his kingdom it becomes 2. And so the warning is we get so obsessed with what someone else is managing and stewarding, we miss what is ours to manage and steward. And the second warning is this: that in the kingdom, fear is not an excuse for hiding. We don't get the excuse of fear. So you can be afraid, but it's not an excuse for hiding what he's given. See, when the Lord comes to Adam in Genesis after the sin, after the fall, and God says, Adam, where are you? Adam says, I was afraid, and so I hid. Fear and hiding are intimately connected. And yet you and I, church, we don't have that excuse. That he will be compassionate in our fear, but he will not allow our hiding. The tragedy, church, is this, is that The greatest wasted resource in the world is human talent. I've said that the last couple of weeks. It's something my boss, Pete Richardson, said to me many years ago and has just been penetrating through my heart. Say, I know as a dad, you think the greatest wasted resource in the world is water when your kids are in the shower. I know that, right? Or the light switch. We all become the progressive parents from that ad, right? We can't help it. Like, this water. I said to my son the other day when he did, I said, do you know how much this carpet costs? He's 4 years old, all right? Yeah. He said, no. I said, $500. This would be $500. Okay, like, not helpful, right? But the greatest wasted resource in the world is human talent. Why? It's buried and it's hidden because of fear and because of apathetic attitudes and because of a frustration that someone else has more. And the call is not to look at someone else, it's to look at him and say, you have given me something to manage and steward. And if I manage and steward it in alignment with you, it will multiply. In my own story, I was so fortunate. One of the great gifts of my life was education. I was able to attend a couple of amazing schools. I did my undergrad degree at Oxford. I came out to the US, did a master's degree at Yale. During my first and second year at Yale, I came out to southern Colorado, to a small town called Trinidad, Colorado, and I met a girl. I fell in love. And we need some background music for the next couple of minutes, because it's a love story, folks. And I fell in love with my wife, Joellen. I'm not sure where she is now. She was over there. Oh, there she is. I fell in love. And so after graduating from Yale a year later, I moved to southern Colorado. My professors thought I was crazy. But I used that old line in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams says, I had to see about a girl. You haven't seen the girl. But their professors at Yale, they don't care. All right, that's not on their radar. But I moved down to southern Colorado. There weren't any jobs available in Trinidad, so I would drive 20 minutes over the border each day into New Mexico, into a little town called Raton. In Spanish, it means little rat, right? True story, it used to be called Willow Springs. They rebranded to Raton, okay? The branding company is no longer in business. It was their last move, their last suggestion. They put it on the suggestion board as a joke. It was one of those context pieces, like we'll give them a bad idea and then a good idea. And they went with Raton, but I found myself in Raton managing a utility company. And I felt so like this was not the plan of my life. This LinkedIn update does not make sense. Oxford, Yale, Little Rat. That wasn't the plan, all right? That wasn't the plan. And you find yourself, I'm in this office, it's got a shaggy orange carpet, it gives me static every day that I walk in, it has all these things, everyone thinks I'm from Australia, no one knows where I'm from, this thing. But I want to say, this is true, I am so grateful for that, I'm so grateful for those people, the people I got to work with. But it wasn't an expression of my talents, what God has given me. And the temptation in those moments is to hide and bury what you've been given. Why? Pride. I'm too good for this. Arrogance. Fear. Boredom. All those things. The temptation is to hide. And our pastor down there, we went to a church pastored by a guy called Ed Richardson, who's Pete's dad. And one day, unbeknownst to me, Ed called up Pete and said, Pete, I want you to meet this young guy. He's really lost. Now, I prefer different introductions, okay? That's, if you're doing a warm intro over email, I want to be in charge of the wording there. But it says, why I was lost. And I spoke with Pete, and I remember telling Pete, just unburdening, I was saying, Pete, I feel like I'm gifted to be the strategic leader, and I don't get to do that in this role. They don't need strategy and this kind of leadership in this role. And I remember he said to me, David, if you are a strategic leader, then wherever you find yourself, be strategic. Stop waiting for your circumstances to change. See, it might not be in the workplace right now, but what about your family? What about your community? What about your church? See, circumstances aren't an excuse either. I can't just say, God, I would have invested it, but my boss is an idiot. I would have invested it, but I was afraid. I would have invested it if only the money had been better. We don't get to play with any of those excuses. We find ourselves wasting the greatest resource in the world, which is what he has given. The time, the treasure, the talents that he's given. We can think of this story of Joseph, right? Where we meet Joseph at age 17 and he has this talent to do what? To tell dreams, to tell the meaning of the dreams. But he's arrogant and prideful. He doesn't know how to use the talent in a humble and honoring way. And he gets sold into slavery in Egypt, and he gets eventually thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit, and he finds himself in prison. And during his time in prison, 2 prisoners come to him and say, "We had a dream, would you interpret the dream?" And what most of us would do, what I would do, is say, "No, my talent isn't for prisoners. My talent is for kings. This is beneath me." We hide, we get frustrated, we put it away in a drawer somewhere. But that wasn't what Joseph did. He tells the dreams of the prisoners, and then he gets pulled out of prison 2 years later because the Pharaoh has a dream, and the Pharaoh needs to have his dream interpreted. And one of the prisoners is out of prison and tells Pharaoh, "Well, there's this guy in prison who can help you with this." And so 2 years later, Joseph gets pulled out of prison to tell the dreams of the Pharaoh. Here's the reality. Joseph told the dreams of the prisoner, so he was prepared to tell the dreams of the Pharaoh. See, some of you might find yourself feeling like you're in a figurative prison and you don't realize you're being prepared for the palace. And if Joseph was not committed to bring his gifts and talents to the prisoner, he would have never brought his gifts and talents to the Pharaoh. And hiding wasn't an option, and fear wasn't an option, and apathy wasn't an option. See, Proverbs 16, verse 8 says it so well. It says this: "A person's gift makes room for them and brings them into the presence of greatness." That's what happened in Joseph's life. Now, we can have all messed up definitions of greatness. We can think, "Oh, great, if I do this, I'm going to be put in front of famous people or powerful people or rich people," whatever. But God's economy is distinct from the world's economy. What greatness means to him is different than what greatness means to the world. And so greatness might mean showing up at the homeless shelter. Greatness might mean working with women who are on the street. Greatness can mean all sorts of things. Greatness, let him define greatness. But may we be men and women who cultivate what he has invested into us, manage and steward it so it makes room for us. You see, "I'm in this box" is not an excuse. Manage and steward what has been put into your hands, and it will make room for you to do things that are great. So it raises this question for us then: how do we discover what God has placed within us? In the work we do at the Patterson Center alongside Pete Richardson, we call it this treasure hunt, right? This buried treasure. It's like we look at a map of the world or a map of Fort Collins, and there's all these X's on the map of treasure that is buried and hidden. And we excavate into what he's invested in us through a series of questions, through a series of clues, through prayer, through insight, through listening to him, through listening to the wisdom of others. But one way we do that is through questions that excavate deeper and ask why, ask why, ask why. There's a principle in business called the Toyota principle. It's where they ask why 5 times to get to the root of something, a root of a problem or an opportunity. Whenever someone mentions the Toyota principle, I like to remind them of what I call the toddler principle, which is where in our house they ask why 12 times. All right, it's Toyota times 2.5 or whatever. But we excavate deeper, and the way we get to that is through what I call clues to our talents. These are clues. And I want to just pause on the text for a few minutes and linger and pause on what clues to our talents might be. Clue number 1 is this: what talents do you notice in your life story to this point? Last week we talked about story. The week before we talked about the story of Moses. We talked about how even in his darkest day of murdering the Egyptian, we get a clue to what his life is really all about. That his life is about bringing freedom from slavery. We get a clue in the life of Joseph of what his life is all about. We get clues in our own story. We look and we see that even in your earliest years of life, what were you so good at? That maybe nobody ever praised the way they should have praised, but it was there from the beginning. You just saw it. You knew it was there. You see, talent that is not invested in stagnates. So you might have to look back far into your story. See, what was there? What did God placed? What are the clues in my story? The second clue is this. What do you love to do that when you do it, time almost stands still? Now, this question takes us into our hobbies, right? But we excavate deeper. So somebody might say, I love to fly fish. And we say, great, is the talent God's giving you to fly fish? Well, maybe, but probably what's going on is, what about that? Well, I love being in the water and being able to read the currents and understand the atmosphere and what's going on and create the right bait or whatever you call it in fly fishing. Fly. Let me write that down. Are you going to be here for the 10:30? Okay. I don't need you for the 10:30. I got the fly fishing. So much just made sense. For me, what do I love to do? I love to watch the NFL, right? Which could mean I have a talent of laying on the couch eating chips. That's one possibility. But I actually think what's true about me, and this is about me, you'll have to think what it's true about you, but what's true about me is what I love is the moment right before the ball is snapped. And the quarterback is looking out, and there's these 300-pound men who are voluntarily running towards him. And right before the ball is slapped, he gets to see what's the defense doing, what's the opportunity, what's the risk, what's the challenge, what does he need to call, what does he need to change. That's for me, that's a clue to me. Not that I should be a quarterback, but that in business, I'm a strategic leader. That's how I lead. I see what's coming at me. And I shouldn't be surprised when business hits me in the face because that's the game. 300-pound men are coming at you. That's the game. So these are clues to our talents. And lastly, the last clue is this. What do others say about you? The people who know you the best, the people who love you the best. What do they see in you? If you don't know, ask them. And if you don't know, ask him. What is true about you? You have this heart for the underdog. You have this hospitality, this creativity. There's something within you that fights for justice. Church, why does this matter? Because it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to him. And if you're going to manage and steward it, you need to know what it is. And so we're invited into this journey, but then when we get clarity on our talents, here's what needs to be true also. We need to connect with the heart that he's given us. Purpose is found at the intersection of our God-given talents and our God-inspired heart for the world. Pete Richardson says the heart is a compass. It points the way. But here's what's also true about the human heart. It's mysterious. The prophet Elijah talks about a heart of stone and a heart of flesh. If you bring great talent, but it comes from a heart of stone, it's pointless. But if you bring great talent and it aligns with a heart of flesh, that's purpose. And you and I are called to sit with him and allow him to cultivate our heart. You see, we see this in the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. What's the great tragedy of the third servant? The great tragedy is that he had not cultivated his heart. So when the master returns, he says, I knew you were a harsh man. And yet the servant was the harshest man in the whole story. Because he took what he'd been given. And not only did he not understand who the master was, but he didn't understand who the people were around him. It's like that person saying, well, I got this talent, but everyone else is an idiot, so what am I supposed to do with it? I'm not going to invest it in them. I need a different kind of people to invest in. The harshness was within his own heart. And so it meant that when this talent was cut, he buried it. And so you and I, we have to cultivate our heart so that we can bring our talents in alignment with the heart. And here's, how do we think about our heart? What does our heart need to beat for? Well, think about it like this. In the parable of the talents, another version calls it the parable of the bags of gold. So the picture is you go to the master and he puts these bags of gold. It's heavy. It has a weight to it. It has a burden to it. And so we ask ourselves, what burdens his heart? What burdens his heart should burden our heart. But here's the great tragedy, is that we spend so much time carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, trying to be the Messiah, right? Trying to fix everything. We carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. We're not called to do that, church. We're called to carry the weight of his kingdom. And his yoke is not heavy. His yoke is easy. That's the burden. That's the weight we are called to carry. And so, church, when you think about living a life of purpose and bringing all that he has given and multiplying it and seeing it expand the kingdom and take us into new places, may our hearts be burdened by the things that burden his heart. May we be weighed down by the things that weigh him down. And may we know that his yoke is easy. His yoke is light. It's not the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's the weight of the kingdom inside of the here. And so, church, this invitation in the parable of the talents is that your God-inspired heart is calling out for your God-given talents to follow. That fear is not an option, hiding's not an option, boredom's not an option. That we would be people who commit ourselves to managing and stewarding what he has given us. That we can go after the things that he so deeply cares about. That we can be the kinds of people who said, God, I got to participate in your economy. Because here's the thing. You know, the guy says, you reap what you didn't sow, you gather what you didn't sow. He provided the seed. Without him, there's no seed. So yes, you have to till. You have to sow. But he provides the seed. And in the seed is the DNA of something that multiplies and will return to him. So church, let's not bury our talents that way. But let's invest our heart, our talents into the world in alignment with his purposes. Let's stand together. Fly fishing, okay, remember. Fly. That was a moment. That was good. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for the invitation of your kingdom, that we get to participate in a story that is bigger than ourselves. We get to listen to a voice that is bigger than ourselves. We get to be a part of something that multiplies and grows, that rolls over and tumbles over, like you say, Jesus. So fear, we will not submit to fear. We will submit to you. And Father, help us as a church to do that. Help us as people to do that, to invest in our workplace, our communities, our families. We love you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.